All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar tonight, Lighter Than Air Series, ADSB. Adam, you can pull the screen if you want. The only request I have is if you guys want to ask a question, please use the Q&A and not the chat. We'll be monitoring both, but if we really want to get the questions answered, please use the Q&A. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you, Adam.
All right, thank you, David. And Jamal, if you want to get the screen set up here as I go through introductions. Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to this installment of our increasingly popular FAA Safety Team LTA Outreach Series webinar, coordinated in cooperation with the Balloon Training Academy, a FAST Team industry member and training provider. Today's webinar is on ADSB and hot air balloons. Our featured speakers today are Jamal Wilson, Matt Haskin, and Jim Wright, and I'll introduce them more in a moment. My name is Adam McGee, and I'm a FAST Team lead representative and designated pilot examiner for hot air balloons out of the Des Moines, Iowa FSDO. Together with Chris Manti and David Hintz, two of the best FAST Team program managers in the country, we are proud to continue this highly successful safety outreach aimed at improving airman knowledge and mishap prevention. We are proud to reach over 3,000 balloon pilots via this outreach over the last 18 months and provide timely and relevant information directly from the FAA. Huge thank you, as always, to Chris, David, Des Moines, Iowa FSDO, and the entire National FAA Safety Team for helping behind the scenes with these webinars. We also have a few other FPMs from other FSDOs helping us out behind the curtain tonight, and thank you for helping us tonight with this webinar. This presentation is intended to increase audience knowledge and awareness for the benefit of safety of flight. The material presented does not supersede official regulations, guidance, or policy. If a conflict arises, those regulations, guidance, and policy shall prevail. So play around with the on-screen controls so you get some familiarity with them. If you have a question, as David mentioned, use the questions box, the Q&A section. Don't be bashful with this, and please do not use the comment box for your questions. Please use the Q&A box. We're all here to learn, and we might learn from your questions, so put it on in there, and we'll try to get them all answered. If we can't get to your question in time or it's too technical, we'll follow up later via email. Our featured speakers tonight are Matt Haskin, Jamal Wilson, and Jim Wright. Matt Haskin is an ADSB subject matter expert from the FAA's Aircraft Certification Office. Jamal Wilson and Jim Wright are subject matter experts from the FAA's Surveillance and Broadcast Services Group. It's been great working with these three and Shelby in preparation for tonight's webinar. I'm looking forward to hearing all the great information and learning more about ADSB. One thing we've talked about is balloon is new territory for these experts. So we've sort of challenged the experts a bit and might not be able to get everything answered tonight, but as Jamal mentioned, this is the beginning of the start of a great discussion. So with that, let's get to it. So thank you for joining tonight, Matt, Jamal, and Jim. And Jamal, I think you're going to lead us off. It's all yours.
All right, thank you for that, Adam, and good evening/afternoon to everyone out there. And thank you for taking the time to sit and talk with us today. Adam hit the nail directly and squarely on the head when he talks about the purpose of today's webinar. I would be remiss as an ADSB employee and expert to say that we would have all the answers for you all today, but this is one of what I'm sure will be many productive and engaging discussions on how to go about equipping a lighter than air vehicle or hot air balloon with ADSB. With that being said, what we thought would be best on the FAA side of the house as it relates to disseminating the information to this group would be to kind of take a three-phased approach. So what we want to do first is kind of refresh everybody's memory on the current state of the airspace requirements for ADSB. And then my good friend Jimmy Wright is going to kind of dig into the systematic piece of it, what the equipment is supposed to do. As a community, if you want to have ADSB in your LTA aircraft, it is very, very important that you realize what exactly it is that you're asking for, right? You want to know exactly what the equipment is, how it's supposed to operate. And then we're going to transition to Matt Haskin, who's really going to have a lot of good information on the aircraft certification piece of it and how to make sure that your installation, when we get to that piece of it, is up to snuff in terms of regulation. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the first part of our presentation. I think. Let me play with this thing. There we go. So when we talk about rules, this rule is not new, even though it started in 2020, January 2nd, 001 hours 2020. The development of the rule and the publication took place 11, almost 12 years ago now. And there were a lot of people that were involved in the making of the rule. When it first came out, we, as the FAA, I say we, as the FAA, tried to give as much thought to the entirety of NAS users as we possibly could. Balloons, gliders, and other aircraft certificated without an electrical system were certainly part of that conversation, as everybody knows. When you look in 91225, there is a piece in there for aircraft certificated without an electrical system and where you can and cannot operate in the NAS. So all that was written in, and I would have to say that this may be the first group that I've dealt with where they look at the reg and then lean forward and say, well, we know what the reg says, but we want to know how we can equip so we can kind of maximize the benefits of ADS-B. I mean, everybody here, including myself, has probably run into folks who look at the rules and try to find ways to go around them or subvert them. But this is the first time that a group has leaned forward and said, well, we want to take advantage of this technology, and that's commendable. So when we talk about 91225, that is airspace, where you need it. But then we have 91227 that Jimmy will touch on in a little while that talks about what the equipment is supposed to do, how it is supposed to perform. Those performance requirements become very important to make sure that your system is operable and giving you the information that you need, as well as putting out the information that needs to be put out. Everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with the fixed and rotary wing graphic here, where we talk about where ADS-B is currently required in the NAS. Adam showed me a very good graphic that he made that was a derivative of this graphic that applied to balloons. I have a table on the next slide that kind of plays directly into his graphic that he's sent out to your group. But just to refresh everybody's memory, on the fixed wing side of the house, this is the current graphic of what ADS-B looks like in the NAS. So as you can see, because there's no mode C veil around the Class Charlie airspace, you have that surface cylinder that goes up and then the expanded wedding cake. And then you have the mode C cylinder, which you can't operate in as a balloon, but then you have the Class Bravo upside down wedding cake up to 10,000 feet, as well as current Class E airspace, 10,000 feet up to your Class A airspace is ADS-B required for a fixed wing aircraft. So this is where we kind of cater to the balloons a little bit on the next slide, where we talk about the Class E exclusion that you guys have currently above 10,000 feet up to Class A airspace, and then within the Mode C veil at most Class Bravo airports, but outside of Class Bravo airspace. So some folks look at this table, even though, you know, in 91225, there's the exemption written in there for hot air balloons to say, I don't like this, Jamal. It feels like the NAS is being taken away from me. You know, maybe we don't have enough space to operate. So I always like to show this slide to kind of put things in context. So these are the areas where ADS-B below 18,000 feet for hot air balloons is required. So you can see all the bigger Class Bravo airports there, and then the smaller green dots are the Class Charlies across the country. So, you know, as we start this conversation, you know, there's still a wide swath of NAS airspace that is available. And what we're going to try and delve into today is how one might operate in an ADS-B environment in some of these controlled airspaces below 18,000 feet. So hopefully that helps to refresh everybody's memory in terms of where ADS-B is required and how it applies currently to balloons, and help frame the conversation as we go down. With that said, I would like to turn it over now to my good friend Jimmy Wright. There's very few people in the NAS that know more about ADS-B, the system, and how it's supposed to perform than Jimmy. So I'm going to turn it over to him and let him walk you guys down the path of system performance requirements. Jimmy, over to you.
All right, Jamal, thank you for that. I appreciate that. So I'm going to just do a brief ADS-B 101 briefing so that everyone here knows what ADS-B does, how it works, and what products we're sending back up to the balloon. In this case, I'm used to saying aircraft. Let's go to the next slide, Jamal. We'll use this slide to just do ADS-B 101. So in this slide, the two jets and the Cessna are all equipped with ADS-B. ADS-B avionics includes a GPS, usually WAS, that uses the GPS constellation up above to calculate its position. And then that GPS is integrated with a radio that sends out your position every second, along with ID and number of the airplane, the course it's flying, its altitude, and some performance metric information about how the GPS is performing. So that goes out every second. So you're transmitting out your position, who you are, where you are, and what you are every second. That is received by the ground stations. Down below, we've got about 600 ground stations deployed across the United States. Those ground stations will receive that data and then route it to the appropriate air traffic facility for air traffic control. At the same time, there's other aircraft in your vicinity. Any aircraft that has ADS-B in, which is receiving these signals, it's an ADS-B in radio and a display to display that data, will see your position if they're receiving ADS-B data on the same frequency you're transmitting in. We're going to talk about the two frequencies we're using here in a minute. So that's it for this slide. All right. So why did we do this? Why did we deploy ADS-B? ADS-B uses, as I said, a WAS position to tell us, air traffic control, where you are. It's much more accurate than radar. The update rate is once a second, instead of once, every 3 to 14 seconds. ADS-B also we have better coverage with ADS-B. It's a line of sight radio. It looks right down into the valleys and the nooks and crannies, especially in mountainous terrain. So if you're within line of sight, see the radio, it can see you. Radar, on the other hand, points up a degree or two to prevent ground clutter. So we've got a lot of coverage underneath where we have radar coverage today. So we've got a lot better coverage. We've put in 600 ground stations, as I said, so we have excellent coverage across the NAS. And then we're also using those ground stations to send traffic and weather information back up to the pilots. So those are the reasons we've deployed this. I'll go to the next slide. This is just another slide that says we've got more accurate, more precise position data on you and ground speed data, which is critical for air traffic control. Better coverage, especially in the mountains. And it's ADS-B radios are much less expensive to deploy. And the FAA before it spends money, it makes a business case calculation to determine that we're appropriately spending your money. And it's much easier to make a business case for an ADS-B radio than it is for radar, which is a very expensive, large footprint product. With ADS-B, it's 20 square feet, much easier to deploy and easier to maintain. So that is why we have done this. All right. All right, so I talked about two data links. You saw the jets in the prior slide, and then there was the Cessna. If you are flying in Class A airspace, so above 18,000 feet, you must send your ADS-B data on the 1090 data link. So it's a 1090 frequency. That's the frequency that transponders reply to interrogations on today. So if you have an ADS-B transponder, it's still doing that, still replying to interrogations, but it also is sending all the many messages, ADS-B messages about your position and who you are, what you're doing, out on the 1090 frequency. So that's required for anyone above 18,000 feet. if you're not above 18,000 feet, if you never go up there, you can still equip with 1090. That's totally fine. Or you can install a UAT, which is not the transponder. It's a different radio entirely. It sends out all the same messages, but on a different frequency, 978 megahertz. UAT stands for Universal Access Transceiver. And Matt may talk a little bit about this, but if you do put in a UAT, the installer will need to, and the manufacturer of that equipment needs to integrate it with the transponder, because the UAT will be sending the 4096 code and whether you're identing and other information that it gets from the transponder. So there's an integration effort that needs to be made to install a UAT. All right. So as I said, there's two frequencies, 1090 and UAT. So if in this scenario that we've got here, I've got a Cessna, it's broadcasting and receiving on 978 or UAT over on the right. I was flying in the vicinity of a jet that is broadcasting and receiving on 1090 megahertz. So they don't see each other air to air. In order to deal with that problem, our ground stations will rebroadcast any UAT messages back up on 1090 and vice versa. If the aircraft is within 15 miles plus or minus 5,000 feet of your position. Okay, so we've dealt with that with the dual link frequency with this ADSR. It's called ADS rebroadcast. All right, Jamal. All right. So that's traffic data. We also send a whole slew of what we call FISB or Flight Information Service Broadcast products, both NexRad, which is graphical data, and a whole list of text products that we send up continuously on the UAT frequency or 978 frequency. So if you've got an ADSB in device and a display, you can receive FISB products anytime you're within sight of a ground station. All right, Jamal. So that's NexRad, as I said. Here's the list of products that we're sending today. It's everything. You got METARs, TAFs, NexRad, and you can see the list there. I believe we're going to make these slides available. These products are also listed on our website, which we'll post that later in this program to show you the website that we have this stuff on. Next slide. All right.
Recording in progress.
All right. I just heard recording in progress from the narrator there. Okay, so we've recently added 6 lightning, turbulence, cloud tops, icing, graphical air mets, and center weather advisories. The FAA is continually looking for ways to improve our FISB products, and we just added these in 2018. You guys see them? I don't. I live in Alaska, by the way. This is a CONUS only products, these last 6 products, but the entire lower 48, all the ground stations are sending this data as well. Right? Okay, FISB facts. All right, so a disclaimer. Couple things. One is FISB is for situational awareness only. It's not for making business decisions, flight decisions. And so flight planning is still required. You still need to get your pre-flight briefing. And even more important than that, we do send NexRad data, but it is not for trying to negotiate your way through thunderstorms. Not that you would ever be doing that in a balloon. But if you were in your friend's airplane or your airplane, you use NexRad from ADSB to avoid weather, not to try to penetrate it, because the data could be as much as 20 minutes old, which is old news in the world of thunderstorms, as you probably know. So it's not for tactical decision making. It's for your awareness of what's going on and to avoid the weather. All right. All right. So back to traffic. So we talked about a minute ago, if you've got an airplane in your vicinity that's transmitting and receiving on the other frequency, and how we deal with that. There are still airplanes up there that don't have ADS-B. And if there are in any airplane within 15 miles of your position, plus or minus 3,500 feet, and they have a transponder that we're surveilling with radar, our ground stations will send that data up to you as well on the frequency you're listening on. All right. So if you're on a UAT, if you have UAT and transponder position that's within 15 miles of your position, up on the UAT frequency, call this Traffic Information Service broadcast. So we've got air-to-air, if you're both on the listening and transmitting on the same frequency. We've got rebroadcast if there's two aircraft using different frequencies in the vicinity of each other, and we've got TSB for unequipped aircraft. So that's a pretty complete picture, although there's still some aircraft out there that don't have any of these things. If they don't have a transponder, we don't send them up as a traffic target. Okay. Still waiting for the next slide, Jamal. There we go. So here's the hockey puck. So this has to do with the ADSR and the TSB traffic that we are sending to you. In order to get this data, you need to be broadcasting ADS-B out. We need to know you're there. And part of the ADS-B message tells us what frequency you're receiving your ADS-B messages on. So once you're broadcasting ADS-B, you become a client, and our ground stations will send up any traffic that's either got ADS-B on the other frequency or a transponder that we're surveilling. We'll send that back up to you if he's within this hockey puck 15-mile radius, plus or minus 3,500 feet for the TSB, which is the non-equipped transponder traffic, and plus or minus 5,000 feet for ADSR, which is the traffic that's on the other frequency. By the way, almost all ADS-B in devices that have listen on both frequencies. Very few radios out there that are only listening on one frequency. So in that case, if you do have one of those, which most of them are, you'll receive any ADS-B target transmitting on either frequency. But if you don't, if you're only listening on one, we'll rebroadcast that data back up. All right, if he's within your hockey puck, excuse me. All right, so for those of you that have or are going to get an ADS-B in device only, which they sell those for $500 to $1,000. It's ADS-B in, it's not ADS-B out. If you don't have ADS-B out, you don't become a client first. Can we go back a slide, Jamal? Would that be possible? Yeah, so you're not a client, so we're not sending any TSB or ADSR back up to your aircraft because you're just listening and you're not sending us any data. So if you happen to be over on the right side of this hockey puck with just an ADS-B in device and no out, you would see any air-to-air traffic, any traffic that's broadcasting ADS-B, you'll see them because that comes air-to-air. You'll see any traffic that we're sending to this Cessna here in the center of this hockey puck. You will see that, which, really makes it look like you're seeing a lot of traffic, but you're not seeing the traffic off to the east of that hockey puck because we're not sending you your hockey puck of traffic. We're just sending the Cessna his. So you'll see his, but we won't be sending that to you. And I hope that makes sense. I've had a lot of trouble explaining that in the past, but you won't see any traffic to the east of the hockey puck unless in this scenario, except for the ADS-B traffic. You won't see any of the TSB traffic. All right, we go forward two now, Jamal. One more. I'm off the hook, so I'll just throw this over the fence to Matt now.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I just want to talk briefly about some of the ADS-B avionics solutions and some of the installation information and policies. So let's go ahead. Okay, so for avionics components, first thing I really want to stress here is that if you have a type certificated aircraft, you also need certified ADS-B equipment. And as Jimmy talked about just a few minutes ago, there's really two flavors of that. So first of all, you could choose to have a 1090 extended squitter device. That's basically a transponder, and that device needs to meet all the performance requirements that are in the TSO C166B. The other solution is to have a UAT device, and those devices need to meet the performance requirements that are in TSO C1. Of course, the important thing to note here that Jimmy also noted is that if you choose to have a UAT device, it does not replace the transponder, so it still needs to be paired with either a mode AC transponder or a mode S transponder. The other real half of the ADS-B equipment piece is that you have to have a compliant position source. So basically what we're talking about is an aviation GPS receiver. So what we recommend for this is that you use a WAS GPS meeting the performance requirements that are in TSO C145 or TSO C146. There's a number of other options available, but these are the preferred ones. The good news is there's plenty of units readily available that meet all of those ADS-B rule requirements on the GPS side. You can buy those GPS units as either a standalone receiver, or a lot of times those are packaged internally with the ADS-B transmitter, so it could be all in one unit. So really, I can't talk about the individual solutions that are out there. There's quite a few, but the various manufacturers are the best ones to talk about the specific solutions that they have available. So go to the next slide. Okay, so talking about ADS-B installation, I'll start with one of the big questions that I've received from this community and others, and I think I've already seen it in the Q&A once or twice about portable devices. Sometimes people call these suitcase units, and unfortunately, the answer to this is that they are not permitted. So our ADS-B rule requires that devices be installed, by which we generally mean permanently affixed to the aircraft. So why do we require that? So the FAA had quite a bit of experience with these portable devices earlier on in the ADS-B development and initial integrations. And what was noticed that these portable devices very often have degraded performance, generally due to the antenna locations of these devices, that are not as good as these permanently installed antennas. Another big problem with these portable devices is that they require the user to input their ICAO address. So now the ICAO address is a 24-bit unique identifier that's associated with just that aircraft, just that ADS-B unit. And if you get that wrong, and specifically if you put in one for somebody else's aircraft, this can really lead to various types of errors and can degrade air traffic control and even degrade some of the collision avoidance systems. So we really try to find ways to make sure that doesn't happen. So when you do these installations, really these installations are generally done under either a type certificate or more commonly under a supplemental type certificate. And then often what happens is that manufacturers will go out and get an approved model list. We call it an AML STC, and they'll put all kinds of various aircraft on that list. And unfortunately, I don't currently know of any of those AML STCs that include any balloons. However, there's no real reason that they can't be added. So my suggestion is talk to the manufacturers that have some of these AML STCs about the possibility of having your aircraft added to that. Of course, there is some testing and validation that has to occur, but once that occurs, those balloons and other types of aircraft can all be added to that same AML STC. Next slide. Another question I get quite a bit, and again, I think I've seen this in the Q&A, relates to the batteries. So the ADS-B rule has this clause in it that says each person operating an aircraft equipped with ADS-B out must operate this equipment in the transmit mode at all times. So this is one of the slight differences from the transponder rule. The transponder rule requires the transponder to be on and operating when you're in the rule required airspace. But an ADS-B unit has to be on all the time. If you have one installed, you have to have it on even when you're outside of that rule required airspace. So what this means is that if you're powering this unit off of a battery, you need to have enough battery power to power the ADS-B equipment for the entire flight. The good news is many of these ADS-B units draw actually quite little amount in the way of power. I've seen some advertised drawing as little as 1.5 watts. Others draw a bit more, but generally, a battery should be able to power these things for a reasonable length flight. The other thing to keep in mind here, though, again, is if you're using a UAT solution and you have a paired transponder, that battery needs to be able to power both of those devices for the entire flight. So even if you're in airspace that doesn't require the transponder to be on, the transponder needs to be on in order for the ADS-B unit to properly operate. Next one. So we have quite a few other documents. I'm pointing to a few here about that provides additional guidance. So our advisory circulars are generally a good place to go. The first one I'll highlight here is AC 9114B, and that provides some operational guidance and information on ADS-B out. One specific thing that I'll point to here is, this may be of interest to some people on this call, is it does allow the use of non-TSO, but still installed, ADS-B out equipment on experimental and light sport aircraft only. So those types of aircraft have a little bit easier path. They do have to have the equipment manufacturer's statement of compliance, so the manufacturer has to state that it complies with all the necessary rules. And there's some other considerations that are spelled out in that AC. So if you're interested in that, I'd recommend you get a copy of that and take a look. And another important point from this AC is that you do not need operational approval for your ADS-B out. Another AC I'll highlight is AC 2165B. This gives the installation guidance for ADS-B out systems. And part of that, there's an entire appendix that covers how to prove interoperability between your ADS-B transmitter and your position source. That's really needed for the first time you pair any new ADS-B out device and a new position source. So if you're using a combination that's already been proven out, that's not necessary. But if you're doing anything for the first time, there's quite a bit of demonstration and testing that needs to be done to make sure that those things work together. And lastly, I'll point to AC 2172B, which gives installation guidance for ADS-B in systems and applications. That's it for this. And then I'll turn it back over, I think back to Jamal.
All right. Thank you for that, Matt. As we were talking about a little bit earlier, there's two separate rules. There's where you need it and then how your equipment is supposed to operate. So as you go down the path that Matt was just talking about in terms of finding, certified equipment, following the STC framework, you get all this stuff on your balloon. You want to make sure that once you have it on there, that it's doing what it's supposed to do. And the way we do that is we encourage everybody who has an ADS-B system to access our public ADS-B performance report. And that allows you to actually check the status, the operability of your equipment. And you can access that here at the website that we have right here. I won't read all the letters and slashes because I'll just mess it up, but it's a free service. We encourage folks to check it at least yearly. I check mine quarterly just because it's free and I like to know what my equipment is doing on a more routine basis. But this really allows the operator to kind of get into the box, as it were. And if anything crops up with your transponder, you're able to identify it quickly and get it rectified quickly instead of operating in the NAS with a transponder that's not doing what it's supposed to do. Some of you may be familiar with our framework for operating in rural airspace as an aircraft that does not have ADS-B out. And what the FAA did was we created a tool known as the ADS-B Deviation Authorization Pre-Flight Tool, also known as ADAPT. And what that allows folks to do is essentially submit a deviation authorization for what we consider non-routine, non-recurring access to ADS-B ruled airspace, whether that be you're going from an uncontrolled field to another uncontrolled field, but you're going to cruise above 10,000 feet. So you submit an adapt authorization, not for your point of origin or your point of destination, but for the cruise in ADS-B airspace. Or if you leave and you're going into ruled airspace at an airport that's either in a Mosey Vale or a Class Charlie airport, anything like that, any access to ruled airspace, you're going to use this. Now, there are a few things that would not apply as it relates currently to a balloon if you don't have ADS-B, because then you wouldn't be able to use this tool. You'd simply enter into a direct negotiation with the facility. But if you do have a Mosey transponder, then you would follow these rules here, where you submit no more than 24 hours before a flight, but no less than 1 hour before a flight. And we have our website here, the ADAPT website, where you can go and there's a tutorial on how to fill out and adapt requests and some other frequently asked questions that'll really help you to fill that out. Also, we have a one-stop shop. It's our Equip ADS-B website. And this goes well beyond anything that we have that's specific just to adapt. This is really a plethora of information having to do with ADS-B and equipage as a whole, where you can do all the things that are located here. Looking for compliant equipment, searching equipment by aircraft make and model, privacy and adapt information, all the frequently asked questions that you could possibly think of are included in there. And we're always adding to it. So there might be some questions from this webinar that we may end up adding in there. But just a good one-stop shop for information. We also have a tool, and it's a Google Earth tool that you can use. You can download this on your device and look real time at the NAS and check out the airspace from an ADS-B perspective and see where it is and is not needed. Really, really excellent tool. So with that, it looks like we've come to the end of the presentation piece of this. And since we have some time left, I'm sure there's plenty of questions. I'm seeing a few in the Q&A. I'm not quite sure how we're gonna
This is David.
moderate.
You want me to kind of start working through some of these for you guys?
Yeah, see what you can do.
All right. Some of them may not really apply to what we've got, and there's some duplicates. I've been trying to go through them a little bit, but I'm just going to kind of start from the top. And it says, are GAS balloons, helium or hydrogen, currently using ADS-B for cross-country flights? I have no clue on that one. Do you guys have? Okay. We'll go to the next one. Unlike most other general aviation aircraft, hot air balloons have the ability to use one bottom end basket and several balloon fabric with different registration numbers on each balloon envelope. And I think you guys kind of touched on it, but the question is, will we need multiple ADS-B units for each registration number?
Yeah, basically, yes. Because each registration number will be tied to an individual ICAO 24-bit address. So that.
Okay, that's kind of where I figured we were driving that too.
Yeah, each one of those would have to have its own basically permanently installed and configured device.
Right. All right. Next question is, most hot air balloons are 1, extremely limited in flight time. 2, the area of travel is usually less than 5 miles below 5,000 foot AGL. 3, most exclusive to day VFR. 4, unless there is a push to include expansion to the airspace balloons are going to fly on. What is the benefit for ADS-B for balloons?
Well, I can take that, Jamal, if you want. I mean, the benefit is you'll be see and be seen, really. And of course, we're not here trying to convince you to equip, but I mean, that would be the benefit. If you're staying outside of any B or C airspace or above it, I saw that one of the questions is asking if you can go above B and C. believe you need 80, I don't believe balloons can go above B or C. I may need to ask Matt on that one. But if you're staying outside of airspace where ADS-B is mandated for balloons, you're not mandated to equip. So traffic will see you, whatever that's worth to you. And if you have ADS-B out and in, you will see traffic. So, I mean, that's a decision you'll have to make on your own. And I see someone says we fly in C. So inside of C, there is a mandate even for balloons to be equipped.
All right, thank you for that answer. The next one, for aircraft that are equipped with UAT, would there be any delay when these aircraft communicate with those equipped with ADS-B, since there is a second transmission?
You want me to get that, Matt?
Well, sure. I mean, I think I can answer it. And as far as, you know, the ADS-R system is what you're talking about. So yeah, I mean, there is a slight delay as the ground station has to receive it and transmit it back. A second or two. I don't know if Jimmy, you know,
yeah, not even that.
Yeah. So it's certainly not instantaneous. There's no way to do that, but it's quite fast. It's not going to be something that you probably even notice really if you put it up beside one that's getting a direct reception.
In real world scenario, I've never noticed a difference. When my eyes go up to acquire the target that I see on my end, it's right where it says it is. So that delay is negligible in terms of acquiring a traffic for the purpose of seeing a void.
Okay, has the FAA considered ADS-B on unmanned LTA aircraft? In the early 2000s, we operated unmanned airships in controlled airspace with Mode C transponders and coordinated with local towers for flights in Class D airports. We are looking for updated guidance for future operations, and ADS-B looks like a great option for our unmanned LTA aircraft.
I don't know the answer to that, Jamal. If we're considering adding that to unmanned aircraft as a requirement, I mean, it's an airspace rule. ADS-B is if you're in the airspace, you need ADS-B. Maybe that helps answer the question.
I think we might have to do some further investigation on that one, because I'm not used to seeing large unmanned airships in uncontrolled or controlled airspace. So it's an interesting subculture of aviation that we're gonna have to address eventually. So,
well, if they're in the airspace, they'll need it because it is an airspace rule.
Right.
Hey, David, can I jump in and ask a question?
absolutely.
Yeah, one of the requirements for ADS-B is to have the transponder ident code and barometric pressure. So does that mean that the ADS-B systems will need that as part of a installation in the balloon?
That's right. I mean, those come with the transponder, basically. And those are some of the key reasons why if you use a UAT, it has to be integrated in with the ADS-B because those things are already integrated into the transponder. But yeah, those are required parts of ADS-B per the 91.227 rule.
Another question was, what is the definition of being installed?
We've back and forth on that, and I don't know that I have an official FAA definition for that. I mean, I do know that we're looking for permanent mounting of the equipment. We're looking for the antenna to be permanently affixed to the aircraft, not to be part of the unit itself, and therefore be able to be blocked by the structure of the airframe or whatever like that. And we are looking for the permanent assignment of an ICAO address, one that's not changeable or needing to be changed as this equipment moves around. Hopefully that helps. But yeah, as far as what's the official FAA definition of installed, I unfortunately don't have one. So.
Yeah, because the question that was posed earlier is that they've got one basket with many different envelopes. The N number is assigned to the envelope and not the basket. And so you've got this interchangeability of the envelope which is cloth or fabric, and one basket, you know, is just the way lighter than air works. So what's the solution in that case?
That's a good question. I've taken a note here to further investigate that because, you know, honestly, it's not something I had considered. I mean, generally the N number is tied to the ICAO address. So what we don't want is for one unit to be constantly switching ICAO addresses. But maybe there's some other solution that we can work.
Yeah,
We can look into that. Yeah.
yeah, the situation with lighter than air is that very fact. That's the troubling thing, or that maybe the FAA needs to come up with a solution. We, the FAA, that is, need to come up for a solution for them in this case.
This is where we revert back to what we said at the very beginning of this, where, you know, we would be remiss if we said we had the answers, but getting together in this forum allows us to kind of air this stuff out and ask the questions that we don't know the answer to, so we can start digging for some of these solutions. So with that said, I mean, keep the questions coming, because answer, you know, it kind of puts us on the hook to start looking, and that's the whole purpose of this.
I guess I've got a question for you guys. If, let's say if balloonists were using suitcase units and turning them on and off, I guess what trouble would that cause, or how would the FAA know that we're using suitcase units or that we're turning them on and off just when we're flying in the airspace? Let's say in Albuquerque in the Class C airspace.
Can I punt that to you, Matt, or not?
Well, I'm not sure how will we know? I mean, you know, if the unit is broadcasting at good power, we're receiving a good signal, and we're receiving the correct ICAO address, I mean, I guess maybe the honest answer is I'm not sure we would know. That doesn't mean it's allowed, but I mean, our concerns, I think the FAA's concerns with portable devices are with the issues we've seen with them, you know, in the past regarding incorrect addresses and blockage of signal.
And if it's not performing well, which is one of our concerns, right, Matt?
Sure.
That we will notice. We have a team of FAA that monitors that and contacts people whose equipment's not working properly. So if it's not a good, clean installation that's working properly, that we will notice, and we will contact you.
And if on the ATC side of the house, if a target is there and drops off, you know, a controller thinking tactically, there's only a few things that he can go to. It's either inoperative equipment, or that balloon went down and he's scratching his temple trying to figure out search and rescue scenarios. That's just not something that you want to put ATC in the middle of. You know, when they're trying to control traffic, if they see a target pop up, jump off, pop up, jump off. Or if it just drops off and never comes back up. You know, in a tactical environment, it's like, what do you think? You know, typically when that happens, it's not good. So to put ATC in that situation is not a, how would we call it? Not conscientious airmanship.
We have a lot of questions relating to multiple envelopes with multiple N numbers. The permanently installed topic is huge with, you know, it's hard to have a non-portable unit when we break the balloon down every single time, put it in a trailer or back of a truck and haul it. I think the technology hasn't caught up with that thought process yet, if I'm not mistaken, unless you guys have some better intel on that.
The technology, you've got the ability to go in and reprogram the ICAO address in these, so you can get into the maintenance mode of these units and do that. But it's a question of the legality of doing that.
Correct.
All right, that requires, that's a repair station activity doing that, although I'm moving into Matt's world when I say that.
Well, yeah, I mean, in general, we don't allow or certainly encourage, you know, operators to change the ICAO address. We look for those to be permanently associated you know, generally in fixed wing aircraft, you know, one N number gets one ICAO address. I mean, so is there something different we can do with balloons? Possibly. You know, I'm going to have to take that back and talk to some other people and think through this. I hope we can come up with something. But yeah, this is kind of a different world where, you know, you might have multiple N numbers on the same basket. That's an interesting situation that we will have to come up with a solution for.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is that it's really not the basket that gets the registration number, it's the envelope of the balloon itself. So that basket can fly under several different registration number envelopes or balloons, if I'm not mistaken. Robert just typed in a question and said, according to FAR 61, an aircraft manufactured without an electrical system is exempt from ADS-B requirements. I occasionally fly near and or over Class C airports. Am I still legal to fly under the shelf or over the Class C without any form of transponder, period?
Well, yes, you must remain clear of the Class C, and I should have researched this. I don't think you can go over it with a balloon, but I could be wrong on that.
Adam, you got any input on that one?
Yeah, so a balloon can go over above 10,000 feet,
All right.
but not the wedge of airspace between 10,000 and the shelf, the upper limits of the Class C. That wedge is protected.
All right. So, okay. Thank you for that. I should have been ready for that one. But you can't go into B or C. You can go above 10,000 feet, which is ADS-B airspace, but not for you if you don't have an electrical system. And you can go Mode C bales or ADS-B airspace, and you can go in there without ADS-B. You can't enter the Class B or C, and as Adam just said, you can't go over B or C if you're below 10,000. So really, it's the B and C airspace, and then that little sliver between B and C and 10,000 that you can't penetrate without ADS-B if you don't have an electrical system.
And can I throw another thing in here too?
Sure.
As far as programming ADS-B, I know that operators are allowed to like program in an angel flight number, or a 135 operator are allowed to put in a flight number in and place it in number. And there's another provision for hiding your identity, putting a code in. So I would just throwing it out there. I would think we should be able to come up with some solution to address this changing envelope or N number on the basket situation.
You want that, Matt, or
well, I mean, I agree that I hope we can come up with something. I'll say that. And as far as what you're talking about is changing the field that we often call a call sign, which we certainly allow and you know is often changed. But what I'm talking about here, the one that we have more concerns with, is that ICAO 24-bit aircraft address, which is this unique identifier that's specifically tied to the airframe, and that's the unique identifier that ADS-BN systems, collision avoidance systems, ATC systems all use to determine, you know, which broadcast is coming from which aircraft. So when that's entered incorrectly, and worst case scenario, when two aircraft in the same area are using the same one, systems have real trouble figuring out who's who. That becomes a safety issue. Whereas if you mess up the call sign, it creates a little bit of extra workload, but it's generally not a safety issue. So that's really where the differential between those comes into.
Yeah, they're two separate fields. The one that you're talking about changing is not the ICAO that Matt's been talking about.
Right. You know, part of the word, you know, that's put out is the speed, size of the aircraft, and a bunch of other data, right? That comes from, that's programmed into it. None of that would be changing in the case of a lighter than air, but you know, the Zen number swap is the thing that they contend with.
Right. Well,
go ahead. There's a
open to
myriad of questions on here that I think we're going to probably go to some email stuff. We'll put these together and get them out and try to get them answered, because there's a lot of similarities to, I've seen a lot of questions on the glider motor glider crowd, what are they doing as well? Obviously, this affects them in the same way if they're a non-powered unit with limited battery capacity to have ADS-B on a glider. So obviously, this is paralleling a couple of fun subcultures in aviation, lack of a better term. So I think a lot of these questions, I mean, we still got 60 unanswered questions. And I think there's a lot of similar ones. I'd really like a chance to digest these, maybe work with you, Adam, and we'll put a good list together and get them to you all. And I'll just give it back to you for now, Adam. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Jamal, did you have something that you were going to say?
I was going to ask a question of the group because they were talking about the multiple envelopes and a registration for each envelope. When an aircraft is operating, and this is just for my edification or maybe to help further the conversation, when the aircraft is operating, you're not going down this myriad of N numbers. What registration is the one that carries when you're operating under all these? Is it the one that's on the furthest outside, or how does that work in the community?
So we go with the in number of the balloon that we're flying, the envelope that we're flying. The other balloon might be packed away in the garage, and so we might have one basket, but 2, 3, 4, 5 envelopes that could be used on that one basket for any given flight.
Understood.
All right. Well, thank you guys for this great presentation and discussion. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Thanks, Matt, Jamal, and Jim. And we'll be in further communication, most definitely, as we try to find solutions for the LTA community. And thank you guys for working on this, and we definitely appreciate it. And yeah, we'll try to get slides out and some questions answered for everyone, just to give everyone more opportunities to get their questions answered here. So if you learned anything, something worthwhile, bring a friend to our next one. Our next LTA Outreach Series webinar is another incredible session. Please mark your calendars for December 15th at 6 p.m. Central. We'll be discussing the hot air balloon medical NPRM, the notice of proposed rulemaking, with Mr. Timothy Adams, the acting executive director of the Office of Rulemaking, and a very special guest, none other than the FAA administrator himself. FAA Administrator Steve Dixon will be speaking directly to balloonists. So we're so proud to bring the LTA community these webinars with timely and relevant information directly from the FAA. So thanks again for everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time. I don't know, Chris or David, do you guys have any final thoughts?
This is David. I just really thank Jim, Matthew, and Jamal tonight for their input. This was fantastic information. And like Jamal said, this is a great way to start this discussion. And I knew we were going to have more questions than answers, but I really appreciate you guys being on. I appreciate Adam, you definitely putting this together. These are growing and it's pretty exciting, and we will work to answer these questions and get some emails out. So I thank everybody for joining us tonight as well.